Those of you that have been paying attention to the app realize I'm pinch hitting for Harvard. Then that's actually very appropriate because many times when I say I'm from UNC Charlotte, people say, oh yeah, the Harvard of the South. And I was talking to my wife last night and she said, well, that should be easy. Just use big words and be very esoteric. And I said, I have two problems with that, Nancy, because one, I don't know very many big words, and two, I don't know what esoteric means. So, I've been asked to talk about this issue from a TA center. The TA center I co-direct with Paula Kohler is NSTAC. If you don't know it by now, we only have 6 more months or 3 more months. It's not long for this world. But our purpose, as most of the TA centers, is to push out evidence-based practices to states and within those some locals. And so that's pretty much what we've been doing since 2006. Our basic model of doing that is to start by identifying evidence-based practices, and that's what we've done a lot at UNC Charlotte, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are. Once you've done those, you need to both increase capacity to do that, but you also still have to help with the implementation piece, and that implementation piece usually evolves around database decision-making, professional development, technical assistance, and then policy analysis and change if necessary. So that's sort of the model that we've been using for our life. When we talk about evidence-based practices, we mean evidence-based practices. And the definition we've taken is not ours, it's from the field of special education, and it's really that top box that are based on rigorous designs, be they group or single case, demonstrated a record of success, but have undergone a systematic review. And that's, when we talk about evidence-based practices in NSTAC, we're talking about that. Our graduate assistants did that systematic review piece. We've identified over 60-some practices. We've done lesson plan starters, which is a way of connecting the teachers. That's actually on our website, that's one of the biggest places people, and our Google Analytics show us that's where people go. One of the biggest places they go to. They want to get those lesson plans that are available there. So what are they? Well, they're divided into a bunch of different categories. They look sort of like this. And you'll notice, if you know evidence-based practices and you read about them, usually it says using time delay to do this, using self-regulated strategies to do this. But as a teacher, you don't usually go in on Mondays and say, I want to use some time delay this week. Okay? You say, I've got to teach my kids grocery shopping skills. So you're really interested in a skill, the dependent variable versus the independent variable. So we have them both ways, but most of the time the teachers will go to this one because they're interested in teaching skills and they want to know what practices are for that. So these are the evidence-based practices we push out. We realized early on doing that people were saying, okay, now if we do these, the kids have better post-school outcomes. And if you've seen the most recent literature that Cobb and his colleagues did, there aren't very many transition interventions that have been tied to better post-school outcomes through a group design, through experimental research. Most of it's through correlational research. So that's where we went after the predictors. So our practices are micro-classroom instructional practices. Our predictors are sort of larger programmatic type of things that have been tied correlationally to better post-school outcomes. And there's 17 of them. The X's mean that there's research. The fact that there's no box doesn't mean that it doesn't lead to better post-school outcomes. It's just there's no high-quality correlational research that's been identified in those areas yet. So here's the other set of them. You can go to the website if you really want to know what these are. And if you're a TA center, or if you've been to this conference for a while, you know that there's 3 levels of TA. There's the universal, the targeted, and the intensive, and we do all of that. Our universal is pretty much our website, and we do an annual capacity building institute where we bring state teams together to do planning. We do targeted specialized based on calls that we get. And then things that might come out of their plans, but they don't want to be in intensive state. They don't want us to be meddling in their business for years. They just want us to be there for a month. So they'll do targeted. And in intensive, we work with 13 states right now intensively. We work with the State Department, and we work with at least one local and sometimes more, depending on the issues. When we work intensively, we usually start with some sort of data-driven decision tool. And there are a number of them that we use across the network of transition TA centers, which would be NSTAC, the Post-School Outcomes Center, and the Dropout Prevention Center. The predictor self-assessment is looking at those 17 predictors that you saw the pretty picture of. The post-school outcomes early on put together a way to use the indicator 14, the post-school outcome data, looking just at that. Since then, they've expanded to look at indicators 1, 2, 13, and 14. They call it STEPS. We've had the Dropout Prevention Center has a new set of early warning system tools, what they're calling the data light tools, just so that schools aren't intimidated by them. And then the NSTAC planning tool we've been using with the states for 8 years now. And that's what they use to develop their plans. We've got a short data probe if schools are focusing on one specific area, say interagency collaboration or transition planning or transition assessment or student involvement in the IEP. And then a district initiative inventory, as Vivian said, want to put this within the context of what's going on in the school system. And there's a lot of stuff going on. They just don't need one more thing. We need to tie it to all those things. So we want to make sure what is going on within a district and how does this fit within that. And it's not something new and different that is going to come and go. If you've seen any of SISIP stuff, we've adapted a number of their materials. The hexagon, probably all of you have seen in some form or another. But in closing, we have the best success with states who are and locals who have the idea that they're going to do something different enough, but it's the commitment to adopting evidence-based practices, that it's not going to be business as usual, it's going to be changing, but it's going to be part of what you're doing, but making things better. And that commitment, we found out, even though you've written an RFP to get funded as an intensive state, doesn't mean that you've agreed to that until, and when you find out you actually have to do that, it can be a surprise, apparently, even though we thought it was pretty clear in our RFP process. The readiness piece, the hexagon, we very much look at that. We look at the time that people have available, the resources they have available, what else they have going on. If they're initiating 2 or 3 other big things in the same year, maybe it's not time to do this. Maybe you need to be doing some of those other things. Flexibility is sort of a two-way street, and it's pretty much on our side. Maybe it's a two-way street, but it depends on us too, determining what the actual practice is and how flexible we can be with it, and what are the pieces that are absolutely necessary and the pieces that we can be okay with if you don't exactly follow what we were asking you to do. And without that, you're going to run into a brick wall quickly, and then you're pretty much done. And then communication. We're in 13 states, but we're in Charlotte and Kalamazoo, so we can't be there. So we've got to be able to be in communication with them on a regular basis. We've got to have a team of facilitators. What do you call them? The intermediaries. That team has got to be on the ground and working both in the state and the local school systems, and we've got to be in constant communication with them too. So to me, those are the biggest pieces that if we run into issues and to try to solve these kind of issues, this is where we see the problems being, or the issues